Hey, we're going to look at this Cattaraugus 225Q quartermaster knife and get a closer look at the pommel assembly and how I put that together. I had a request for that. And while I'm at it, I'm also going to change the screws that I have to hold this in place because they're really hard to take out, as you'll probably see in the video coming up. The original ones had a leather handle, it had leather rings, and it had a much rounder pommel assembly than what I did. I did more of an oval shape. I'll get into some more detail about how that works next, so stay tuned. The pommel assembly on this knife consists of 3 plates, and I have mine connected with 2 screws, flat-headed screws. The original ones had rivets, and the key to getting this together is the center plate, which I'll show you in a second. I was having some trouble getting these screws to come out and resorted to even having to use the vice grips to pull this one screw out that was very difficult to unscrew. And that's because instead of countersinking the holes deeper in that final plate originally, I ground down the top of the heads of the screws, which did not give me very much room to screw in on the flathead part of that slot. The most important piece is the second plate, and you can see it has a strange shape to it. And that allows it to go on to the tang at 90 degrees, and then you have to rotate it to lock it in position. The final plate is pretty much similar to the end plate without the countersunk holes for the heads of the screws. I did tap threads in both the first and third plate to accept those screws that I put in there. The handle, you can see, is not quite centered onto the tang, and I did that by hand, and it was very difficult to get the holes to line up from either side. I didn't have a long enough drill bit to go all the way through, so I chiseled and drilled out the center of that piece of hickory. I made it out of one piece instead of putting a seam, cutting it and gluing it back together, which would have been a lot easier. And here is the handguard that I also made out of, these are all made out of an old hinge that I found from a toolbox, and this was a hinge that was inside the toolbox from a door, and the metal seemed to be just about the right thickness to work on the pommel to get it to all fit within that small space I had. And so this had to be ground a little bit differently. You can see it's tapered just a little bit to accept the top part of where it attaches to where the knife blade starts. As I mentioned before, I'm going to put in some new screws here because the ones I took out, I ground off too much of the head and there wasn't enough of a slot to actually try to remove those screws. It made it very difficult. So I'm going to carefully here just take out a little bit more material without going too far and make sure that I have enough room to countersink the heads of the screws. So I'm doing that here on the drill press, which I didn't have at the time I built this knife. A lot of the tools that I've gained since then really have helped me, do more precise work like this, and a lot safer. Here's a more detailed look at what it looks like countersunk with some room for the threads of the screws to engage in that final plate. This is the size screws I used, and I need to use a slotted screw so that it will be as flat as possible. Reassembling the handle this time, I decided to super glue the handle to the finger guard to eliminate a little bit of vibration that I was feeling sometimes when I used the knife. There was just a little bit of extra room there that I was going to take up with that super glue. And now I'm going to reassemble all the layers of the pommel, the different plates, and you can see how they line up together. And I had to have enough room for those screws to go through that center plate so it wouldn't interfere with that. Then the only other trick is to make sure they're all lined up as you do your final tightening to get these screws into the handle. And so that takes a little bit of finesse, backing the screws out a little bit to make sure that everything's lined up so it's as even as possible on that handle assembly. Again, the original handles had, instead of screws, they had rivets in those positions. You can find some clear images of the original pommel assembly on Google Images where you're able to see that center plate, which is the key to trying to reconstruct the pommel assembly. So there it is, it's all put back together, and I don't have any plans on taking it apart anytime soon. So I appreciate you watching. Let me know if you have any questions or comments, And until next time, take care and get out there and make something. See ya.